Hey, Comics Cubers. My guest today is the legendary Paul Levitz, who worked at DC Comics from the 1970s to December 31, 2020. He worked as a writer, he worked as an editor, he worked as an executive, and as the president and publisher of DC Comics from 2002 to 2009. There's a lot of Paul Levitz career retrospectives going around, so that's not what I zoomed in on. Instead, I wanted to ask him about business and basically how the business worked. So we do talk about the history of stuff, but we also talk about the ins and outs of the business, what makes certain decisions like the balance between art and commerce, that kind of stuff. And yes, before all of you ask, I did ask him about the Watchmen contract. I know that's what a bunch of you clicked on this for. Support us on Patreon, be a producer. The links are down below. Want to get a credit at the end of these videos, then go to Patreon and support us, be a producer. And without further ado, Paul Levitz. Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I am joined by the legendary Paul Levitz. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Nice
to be here.
Nice to have you here. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. The first question I ask everyone that comes onto my show is, why do you love comics? But I think for you, I'm going to split it into two questions.
Okay.
One at the beginning and one at the end. So the first one is, what made you fall in love with comics?
It's a good question. I was a voracious reader already as a kid, and I fell in love with comics through the Superman comics that Mort Weisinger edited.
Mhm.
That was very heavily a complex science fiction universe. And I think one of the things that kids in every generation love is what I've come to call secret knowledge. You know, for my youngest generation, that was Pokemon. So he knew that Charmander turned into Charlizard, turned into Charpuppy, times whatever, 150 different guys. For my grandson, age 7 now, I'm watching him, like many kids of my generation, but not me, fall in love with sports statistics. And he's got to know every team and what their colors are and who's playing on which team and what the fantasy could be. I think kids love access to a world their parents only superficially know, and it's an empowering thing. And Weisinger's comics had that quality. The different planets the Legionnaires lived on, their secret names, all the different Kryptonian nonsense that was invented. A lot of it doesn't stand up very much to the current level of sophistication that kids have. But for the kids of my generation, where you could still believe that the Martian Manhunter actually came from Mars,
Mhm.
this was just a fall down a wonderful rabbit hole.
Do you believe there's been a trade-off between sophistication and sheer pure inventive wonder?
I think wonder's harder today. Kids learn so much early on. There's so much more to know. When I was, I don't know, 15 years old, 18 years old, it was possible to know enough about science to be able to talk intelligently about any branch of science with anybody who knew anything but the most sophisticated version of it. Yes, a rocket scientist was a rocket scientist, but you could know a fair amount about what rocket fuel was and why rockets went up and what escape velocity was. And you could know the same sort of thing about biology and chemistry and all the rest. Nobody can do that anymore.
Mhm.
The wealth of knowledge that we've expanded in is just outrageous and wonderful. But it's not animal, vegetable, mineral. It's animal, vegetable, mineral, protist, this, that, the other thing.
Yeah.
Way past my capacity to learn at this age. And I do think it's harder to have wonder. I love the Dr. Dolittle books. Um, Looking back on them as an adult, they're pretty thoroughly racist in the way that England was in the early 1920s, 1930s, whenever Hugh Lofting wrote them. But he explored all sorts of worlds, and he went to the moon, and he went to these unimaginable places under the ocean. And I think if I were 10 years old now, in the current generation reading them, I'd say, there's nothing down there. That's ridiculous. Okay. It's a different time, different generation.
Yep. Speaking of that, you talked about Superman in the Mort Weisinger era, and a lot of that was written by Otto Binder,
Mm-hmm.
who also wrote the Golden Age Captain Marvel. Would you say that Otto Binder is one of the most underrated comic book writers of all time?
Uh, that's kind of a race. San Diego gives out these Bill Finger Awards to every year to a writer who was largely uncredited and undercompensated and underrecognized. And I think Binder has been awarded one. You have Binder, you have Ed Hamilton, who was my particular love for a lot of the work he did on Legion, although Binder wrote the very first Legion story. Franz Herron, who wrote a ton of Black Hawk. I just saw him being credited with the very first Captain America story. I'm not sure how anybody came up with that. But did Joe Simon write it, or did Joe and Jack collaborate with Herron on it, or is it just an error? But Herron wrote hundreds and hundreds of stories of so many characters that we grew up on. The list of these guys who were so facile and so underpaid that they had to churn these things out almost daily is really astounding. And even the ones who have been more recognized because they came in either a little later or they lasted a little longer. Bob Kanigher, the most prolific writer DC ever had, created everything from a host of the Flash and Wonder Woman villains to the whole war universe, pretty much for DC. Bob used to write a script on a typewriter, sometimes on the train coming into work in the morning. It's okay. It was just such a different universe at that time. I got to know a lot of the guys. I didn't get to know Binder or Hamilton, unfortunately. Both of whose work I've really appreciated. But Julie Schwartz knew I was a science fiction fan, so if he had somebody interesting coming into his office, he'd yell down the hall, "Hey, Paul, come in here. Say hi to Ike." Dr. Asimov? Yes, sir. I think I've only read 150 of your 300 books, but I really, really appreciated them. It's
As time went on and you went higher and higher in the business, did you ever at any point stop getting starstruck?
I don't think I ever stopped being that way about the writers and artists I grew up on. But, I got to work with most of them. And once you work with them, they're people.
Mm-hmm.
And this one's really a talented, but not the brightest bulb. This one is wonderful and dedicated beyond anything you ever saw on the page. And it's funny and just pleasant to be with. So it transforms from your being starstruck with them as an icon to an honest respect and an honest friendship if you're lucky.
You were born in the mid-50s in New York. So you were there as a kid for, to name a few things, Beatlemania, Bob Dylan.
Missed it.
and the Marvel age of comics.
Came in late to it, but came into it.
Was there ever, did you ever at any point feel like you were aware of any sort of shift in the cultural consciousness? Because that's, having not been around at the time, that's what it's kind of sold as to people like me.
Well, I mean, from a distance, it's an inflection point in American culture on a lot of levels.
Yeah.
You know, when you're a kid, there's an enormous amount you're just not aware of. The civil rights movement and everything that was going on in America at the time. You know, my family was not particularly popular culture oriented, so I missed Beatlemania entirely.
Mm-hmm.
My mother used to play Broadway show tunes, and that's what the music I fell in love with as a kid. I don't think there was a radio tune to popular music till I did when I was probably 14 or 15, something
Okay.
like that. You don't have that perspective, you know, that you have looking back on it, or that you have from a safe distance from it. I have the perspective to know that I was incredibly lucky in where and when I was born. The world had reached a point of technology that was much healthier than it had ever been before, so you could grow up safe from a lot of diseases. I'm of the lucky generation that grew up between penicillin and AIDS, so there was an aura of invulnerability to my generation for a moment or two.
And then you created the first popular fanzine, and I believe you worked with people like Paul Kupperberg, right?
Kupperberg. I wouldn't call it the first popular fanzine. You know, the Comic Reader had been around through about 6 different editors since the early 60s. And fanzines Fandom was tiny. So it was something that people grew out of fairly quickly. Mark Hannerfeld, who had been the last editor of it, had modernized it considerably, gotten it to about 1,000 subscribers, if I'm remembering right, 700 or 1,000, something like that. But the Rocket's Blast Comic Collector had been around for similar time and probably was well over 1,000. Alan Light's Buyer's Guide starts at the same time as the etc. fanzine that Kupperberg and I started. Don and Maggie Thompson had been doing Newfangles for several years at that point. It became the first fanzine to regularly have a sort of a TV guide kind of information about the comics industry, because it was at a moment where the companies were willing to pay that much attention or to allow access. They didn't think it was worth really paying that much attention to fandom. Mm-hmm. They didn't think it was worth putting credits on the stories, or at least most of them didn't. Marvel put credits on in those days. Everybody else was kind of choppy about it. But there were enough young people coming into the comic companies. They said, yeah, and either they came out of fandom or they understood fandom. They said, yeah, it's cool that we know whose work is coming out and when our work is coming out. And that really opened the door more than anything else. And of course, growing up in Brooklyn and going to high school in Manhattan, I had access to all of this in ways that lots of kids simply couldn't have. Never even mind the modern technology we're using today. Just the idea of a long distance telephone call was a frightening concept in those days.
Yeah, that's one of the things, right? It's like I think the younger people now take that for granted. The fact that being born in New York, living in New York at the time, if you wanted to work in comics, that was a big advantage.
You were going to get a shot. There weren't that many of us. A generation was aging out of the comic book business, so seats were opening up. And if you were hanging around saying, I like this stuff, could I do something? Could I staple? You would probably get a chance to do something. And look, a lot of kids did it for 2 minutes and said, I'd rather get a real job. A bunch of other kids did it and didn't have anything to offer creatively or professionally in what to do. Or people just moved on to doing other things. But most of the crowd that wanted it got a chance to get in the door.
What do you think of the way fandom has evolved from the time you were running the Comics Reader to now?
Part of how the world has evolved, right? The good news is we're talking. It's a so much smaller world. One of my first responsibilities at DC as an assistant editor was managing the administrative side of the Filipino artists we were working with.
Yeah.
And I remember that Alex Nino was late on something that we needed for a particular issue, not just a mystery story. Probably was an episode of Captain Fear or something.
Yeah.
We had to, it wasn't enough for me. I couldn't make a call. Joe Orlando, who was the editor and a major figure in comics, couldn't make a long distance call like that. He had to go to Carmine Infantino, who was the head of the company, to get authorization for us to make a long distance phone call to Nestor Redondo in the Philippines to ask, where the hell is this story? And listen to Nestor saying, we've sent the runners out into the jungle to find Alex. I don't know if that was bullshit or hyperbole. I don't know how much jungle there was in the Philippines in 1970, probably 74 or 75 at that point. But it was technologically, that was an expensive decision to make a phone call to the Philippines.
Right.
My kids don't understand that. My grandchildren, dear God, my grandchildren don't understand that. My youngest grandchild at 3 months just went from New York to Argentina and Ecuador on a vacation with his parents. He's already been to 2 continents. I don't think I got to my second continent until I was 20, 19, something like that.
I get that. It's such a big change because 20 years ago I was still using phone cards to call people long distance, and now here we are. We're on video. It's
at zero
crazy.
cost.
It's at zero cost. I do think I do think Nestor was kind of bullshitting you a little bit. So
Exaggerating, let's say. It's okay.
yeah.
The whole arrangement between the Filipino artists and the American publishing companies at that time was a fascinating exercise in both sides fooling the other side. As I understand it, the going page rate in the Philippines for the top guys at that time was about $5 a page. The going page rate in America at the time was for the top guys was about $65 a page. So when they made a deal to outsource the art to the Filipinos, and they were paying the Filipinos $17 a page, the Filipinos thought they were screwing the Americans totally because they were getting 3 times what their usual rate was. And the Americans were totally convinced they were screwing the Filipinos because they were paying 1/3 of what they ought to be paying. I was never in those rooms, so I can't tell you whether everybody was laying their cards on the table and saying, well, we'll do this, as long as it's much cheaper than what we do, or we'll do this as long as it pays a lot better, or whether they were just smiling the whole time and faking it. But there was a lot. There was a lot that was silly about it.
The Filipino Invasion happened in 1972. You were 16 years old, and you were there. And I read enough of your interviews to know that you really liked the experimental vibe that DC had going at the time.
It was a weird business. Jerry Conway publishes his first novel, I think, at 16.
Right.
a lot of it was whether or not they realized how young you were. Uh, you know, when Jerry came on board as an editor at DC, Carmine thought he was significantly older than he was, and I still remember. Didn't think he was like 40, but didn't think he was whatever he was, 20, 21 or 22, I guess at the time. And I still remember the editorial meeting or the conversation where Carmine found out how old Jerry was, and you watched his jaw drop. And they needed people to do this stuff. Yeah. They didn't pay a lot of attention to the niceties of the laws. I think, looking back, I think there's at least 3 different labor laws that were broken hiring me. Okay. No harm was done.
I mean, you wanted to do it.
I wanted to do it. It worked out fine.
Yeah.
Technically, we used to have a thing called working papers in New York State, where you got a certification, I guess, from your parents and from something that said it was okay for you to be hired to do something at 16. I don't know. A couple of other things, but it happened to a lot of us at the time who were young or unqualified, because the industry didn't have much of a bench, and the bench that it had was aging out or given up.
It's crazy how young the industry was, because you know, you hear stories about Jerry Conway. You brought up Jerry Conway, like not wanting to do conventions because what a fan reaction to what he did to Gwen Stacy, and you realize he was like 20. Like, I don't think I would have been able to handle that.
Yeah, we were all kids. I think Jerry was older than 20 when he offed Gwen, but not a lot.
Not a lot, no.
You know, the old guys were. I mean, there was the Julie Schwartz generation that was already in their 50s and the 60s, but out of the new generation, Roy and Nelson, who were probably the first 2 fans to come in. Roy is 12 years older than I am, 13 years older than I am. So they were maybe 30 at the time. And all the rest of us were in our teens, coming out of schools like art and design for the young artists, or coming out of the conventions, or maybe in the early 20s. Most of the kids didn't go to college. The artists certainly didn't. A few of the writers did.
I wanted to go back to the Filipino Invasion. So that happened in 1972. Can you tell me, I know you weren't in the rooms with all of the fights, but quote unquote, but can you tell me what the general feel was in the community at the time, seeing these Filipinos come in?
I think it was a cross between, wow, this stuff is amazing, and are they taking jobs away from us? The good news was that the invasion happened at a time when the number of, let's say, dramatic comics, not we're talking mystery or war or things like that, was expanding significantly. So the established artists weren't losing out on work in the process. And there may have been an older guy whose style was perceived to be dated who was being pushed out, but they weren't being pushed out because Tony DeZuniga showed up. They were being pushed out because we just don't like that stuff anymore. Mm-hmm. I think of guys like Bernie Bailey and Howard Purcell, Bill Ely, they'd all been mainstays of DC for many years. And by the time I got there, they either couldn't get work or they could only get a tiny little bit of work once in a while. But I think most people just sort of look and say, wow, so much detail, so beautiful. And I'm sure lots of people were sitting there saying, yeah, but they don't do this that we do really well. Yeah, different artists, different upbringing.
Different schools. Is there a specific Filipino artist that stood out from the rest of the pack?
Several, I mean, I think. Alex probably was the most unique stylist of that first generation. Alfredo, for his sheer speed, was amazing, terrific style, but also just remember he invented some kind of brush that he used that he loved, that nobody else seemed to be able to work with, that he claimed was the secret of why he was able to do so much. I don't think it had as much to do with it as whatever went on in his head. Nestor, for sheer beauty. Tony, probably the closest to the Americans in style of that first gang. I got to work with Jerry Talaic on a bunch of stuff that I really enjoyed. He's still around.
Yes.
One of the few of that first crew still around. Fred Carrillo did a bunch of my stories. Never got to have any kind of relationship with him. So I don't know if he's still around. Ruben Yandock, I think, was one of the underrated ones. He had a more personal style there. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody and doing a disservice to someone.
I heard Alfredo told Joe Orlando that he could draw 80 pages a week.
I don't think that's humanly possible, but
yeah,
maybe.
Maybe he was never asked to. So
or maybe it's that same bullshit. But if I ask for 80, maybe they'll give me 40. And with a good assistant, maybe I can do that. I don't know.
I don't know. So you might be interested in knowing this, but do you know what happened in the Philippines in 1972?
No, I have no idea. The only connection I have to what was going on in the Philippines is a great story Joe told me about a conversation he had with Malang, who was the Minister of Culture at the time and was actually a former comic book artist.
Oh, okay.
And either Joe or I don't know whether Joe said this or was recounting what Carmine had said. We got this small, lousy little country. How come you got so many great artists? And Malang said, well, in America, you don't think everybody can be a mathematician, but you teach everybody to add and subtract, multiply, and divide. And so you find out who's good at math. In the Philippines, we think everyone should know how to draw a horse. That's about all I know about what was going on in the Philippines at the
time. President Marcos declared a dictatorship and put the
same period of time
at the exact same time.
Okay.
So, and it's never been confirmed, but I do feel like it's too much of a coincidence because art was now all of a sudden under strict supervision in the Philippines.
Plausible.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about the business side of things, and let's talk about Legion and the way you wrote Legion and the Great Darkness Saga specifically, because when you wrote the Great Darkness Saga, fans did not know that you were going to reveal Darkseid as the bad guy.
Right.
Currently, in the trade paperback solicitations era, do you think you could have done it that way?
I mean, you could still do it that way in the periodicals. Obviously, you can't do that in the trades anymore. And with Great Darkness, they put Darkseid on the cover.
Yeah.
Years and years, decades ago. And it followed that pattern on all of the different editions we've had over the years. I think you can still surprise the readers. You got to work a lot harder at it. The company has to really believe in it. Even by the late 80s, early 90s, we had to work a lot harder at it. And once or twice, there was something we were trying to keep secret that got out there where we had to decide to change the story around. I remember there's one, I don't remember the specific of the story anymore, but there was one thing involving Captain Atom at one point. Where that was
Armageddon? He was supposed to be the bad guy? Is that
something.
yeah.
It's been a long time, and it wasn't one of my stories, so I wasn't paying that detailed attention that I remembered 30 years ago or whatever, 30 years later. But I remember, oops, it's out there, quick, let's change it around and put somebody else in. Okay. But it got progressively more difficult, not just because of the solicitation process, though that's certainly a part of it. And you look at the Byzantine things we did around the death of Superman to make that appear to be more convincing. But the web and the gossip games that are out there. I was one of 2 or 3 fans who were writing news in their fanzine, maybe at the time I was doing it. Nobody else was doing it. Nobody else seemed to give a damn. Now we've got 400 podcasts and 57 million websites, half of which are saying something that has no basis in reality, but is something they made up this morning. I forget what I was wincing at as I was reading this morning. Somebody's lengthy analysis arguing for something that had no logical basis, in fact.
There's a lot of those.
Yeah. And look, I was as ignorant as anybody writing it today, but there was only one of me.
Right.
Maybe there were three of me if you count the other couple of guys out there. Three monkeys at a typewriter would take a very long time to come up with Shakespeare. 57 million monkeys at typewriters are going to come up with it pretty often.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of noise out there.
It's true, because a lot of the time fans are just speculating and they're guessing and they're like, oh, obviously they're doing this because blank. But because there are so many of them, somebody's bound to get it right.
Yeah, or just to make enough noise that it clutters up what's going on in the stories.
Yeah. Speaking of something like keeping a secret, like the Great Darkness Saga, is one of the reasons also the fact that when you were writing it, DC was a much smaller company, so there's fewer people around to have to keep a secret. And now, like, how many people do you even have to brief to be like, keep this hush hush?
There's more people working at DC today than there were when I did the Great Darkness Saga, but not by an order of magnitude. By the time I did the Great Darkness in 82, 83. So we were about 60 people then. I think DC is about 100 now.
Mm-hmm.
It's shrunk back down from what it was towards the end of my run there. That's not that dramatically larger a thing. There's more procedure indoor. I didn't have to ask anybody, can I use Darkseid? Keith and I had developed a story. Mike Barr might have still been the editor when we started, or Laurie Sutton. I forget exactly the timing of when it first began. It's probably still Mike. Nobody else needed to know. Nobody else gave a damn. You weren't expecting a giant boost in sales because of it. The fact that we did a extra large, extra expensive last issue, I don't remember whether it was 50 cents or $1. First time DC did that for an ordinary storyline. Probably was only because I was on the business side of the company, and writer me could take the editor by the hand and bring into the office of business me and say, we should do this, and convince my left side of my brain could convince the right side of my brain, or vice versa. Um, Marvel had done it first with an X-Men story in Chris's Dark Phoenix
Yeah.
6 months or so before. It was like, that was cool. We should be able to do that. And this is a place we can try doing that.
It is an interesting place to be doing it because I do think that a lot of the time, a lot of people like to figure out what the DC counterpart to the X-Men is, and I've always thought it was the Legion, just because of the soap operatic nature of it, and they both have a telepath, I guess. Um, you co-created Prince Gavin, Starman with Steve Ditko. It is my favorite thing that you've done, and I think it's purely because I discovered Starman Prince Gavin very early on in life.
Imprinting. Yeah.
Yeah. And but I've always thought he was cool. I've always thought his lore was cool and his design was cool. But what was it like in that time to work with Steve Ditko? Like how did that feel for you?
I did about 20 stories with Steve. I was lucky enough, I don't know if you can make it out on the wall back there. Maybe. You have the cover of one of the issues of Stalker.
Okay.
It's a series I got to create when I was 17 years old with Ditko and Wood. How does that happen?
That's amazing.
It's because I was there. And when you're 17, you kind of take it all for granted on one level. On one side, I was enough a fan that I certainly knew the background of these guys, and they were many years older than I was. I can't do the math in my head that easily of how old they were at that time. Vastly more accomplished. So it was cool on all of that basis. But the outrageousness of it, I have much better idea of from a safe distance. Working with Steve was lovely because he was a total professional. This is, I think I was one of the last writers to work with him when he was working to be a commercial comic book artist, as opposed to passionately telling some stories that were important to him. I mean, I guess there's a period when he's back at Marvel, Machine Man, Squirrel Girl, things like that. That's a little bit after my time. But on a wall around the hall from here, I have the story we did for Mike Friedrich's Imagine, one of the Star Reach ground level independent comics before Indie started, that Steve did with me. And I think that was the last story he did twice up. When we shifted the art page size from twice up down to 1.5 up, 67 or so, it dramatically affected a lot of the artist's style.
Oh, really?
Neil makes the argument that it affected him and others because now you could see the whole page as you were drawing. Yeah. And he thinks that's a lot of why the compositions changed. Neil gets more daring at that time. Gil Kane gets more daring at that time. Gil gets more design oriented than he ever had been before. Kirby and Ditko, for my money, get weaker working on the smaller page. They're not as comfortable with it. Don't know why, right? And other people's opinions might differ. But when we were doing this project for Friedrich, Steve said, "Can I do it twice up?" And sure, not a problem. And this was for, again, a proto-indie, if you will. As long as it could be photographed, it was fine. So he really poured a level of detail into it that I don't think he was doing on anything comparable at that point in his career. It's just a little 8-pager. It's not. Yeah. I wasn't a very good writer yet. It's not an important story on any level, but it's very cool that it was, one of the last times you really see a fantastic Ditko universe come to life for even a minute. because working double size, he could really pour that into it.
I'm very fascinated about this on a technical level because I feel like is there a pattern between the people who are better twice up rather than 1.5, or is it more just a matter of the artist's comfortability?
I think you have to ask the artists who
Okay.
really understand the process. I found Neil's answer to that years ago fascinating. But when you talk to the artists, whether it's about changes in page size or drawing on a tablet versus drawing on a page, they see it very differently than the writers do. They see it with an intimacy because that's what they do with their lives. And often they express it in really interesting fashions.
Um, getting back to the business side of things. I'm sure you knew this question was coming, but there's been a lot of talk in the comics community about the Watchmen contract.
Yeah.
And I guess I would like to hear your side of the story because I, you know, I feel like everyone's heard it from Alan, and some people have heard it from Dave a lot. But I guess I would like to hear about, yeah.
It was a major step forward in comics at that point to be able to put in something that was very common in book publishing, what's
Mhm.
called an out of print clause. The idea of an out of print clause in book publishing, it's a little weirder these days with the digital books, but still, was that as long as a publisher was continuing to do its job selling the books, they should hold the rights to the books. If they stopped selling the books, the author should have a right to write the publisher and say, "You're not selling my books. Give me back my rights." And the publisher had to, maybe a brief period of time in which they had to reprint the book or re-promote it or something. And if not, the rights went back to the author, who could then bring it to another publisher. That was new to comics in the 1980s. I'm not I'm not saying we were the first, but it was very rare, and we were the first to apply it to something as major as a project like Watchmen. The version we did with Alan and Dave was a little bit wonkier because it also had some exceptions in it that said, if it sells well enough that we have paid you this many dollars in royalties, then the out of print doesn't work. If we are under a film deal, because it was always our intention to see if we could make a film deal on it. And in fact, we did by the time Watchmen issue 3 or 4 came out. Jeanette had already talked Fox into it. Then the out of print doesn't count. But regardless, the out of print would never have been triggered anyway because the book never went out of print. We continued to do a good job publishing it.
It's an evergreen seller.
It was lightning in a bottle. Now that's Alan and Dave's credit, not anybody else's. But DC also did a good job of keeping it in print and marketing it effectively and not fucking it up.
The out of print clause I'm fascinated by because I could see people talking about it in one of two ways. One of which is like it's not beneficial to the creators, and the other one of which is it is very beneficial to the creators. Because
A lot of what we tried to do in the years where I was on the business side was modeled on what had happened in the book publishing business in America.
yeah,
Book publishing had evolved over about 100 years in America at that point, longer if you take in the things that were followed as tradition from Britain. It was perceived to be a reasonably fair and decent business,
yes,
as opposed to motion picture accounting. The book business accounted for you based on cover price times copy sale for most of its work.
straightforward.
There were a few exceptions for weird kinds of sales, but basically it was very straightforward, very easy to audit if you wanted to, very clean and honest. We took most of what we tried to do from that world because it seemed to be a fair standard to work to. And I believe out of print, for a print-oriented world, is a fair standard. And the more modern version of it, I think, is a version we used when I was working with Boom, which was based on how much revenue we are continuing to drive for you, the freelancer.
Mhm.
Let's agree on, once this thing has happened and had its natural life, how much should it be earning you in royalties every year to count as still in print? And if it drops below, if we're not earning you $1,000, $10,000, whatever the number may be, then again, you should have the rights to call us on that and see if somebody else can do a better job.
I'm also fascinated by the fact that fans keep on discussing this because it's not really part of the book.
It's one of the great comics, so people will pay attention to it long after they will something else. But you can only judge these things based on the moment that they're in.
Yeah.
And, is it horrible that Siegel and Schuster sold Superman for $130? Yeah, on one level. On another level, that was a really high page rate for what was going on then. It was common to sell all rights. And by the way, in modern terms, they made another, I forget what the number I've calculated out when I had access to that data is in current dollars, but it's probably in current dollars, I don't know, maybe $5 or $6 million
Right.
over the next few years as they were working with DC under contract.
Yeah.
Is it horrible that Jack Kirby didn't get rich off all the fabulous stuff he created for the Marvel Universe? Sure. But nobody expected it to be anything fabulous, and including Jack. And he made what is by any modern terms a really good living as a creative person in America.
Yes.
Now, he was the best in the business, and he was the hardest working guy and the fastest guy around, and that contributed to his making a good living. But nonetheless, he lived in nice places, had a pool in the backyard, brought his kids up fine. Yes, in a perfectly fair world, he would have ended up a millionaire during his lifetime, many times over. And some of the things that we put in place at DC in the 70s and the 80s between Jeanette's efforts and mine made a difference in his life, and certainly made it possible for other people to have that kind of luck that we believe they should have. But by the standards of 1930 for Superman or 1985 for Watchmen, 84, whatever it was when we did the contract, these were sane deals by the basis of the time, and nobody put a gun to anybody's head. Whether Alan actually read the contract and didn't understand it, I don't know. But he's been unhappy about it ever since. He's allowed to be unhappy. He's allowed to say that he's unhappy. He's a man of enormous talent and, in many cases, great principles. I have a lot of respect for him. But I don't believe we did anything wrong.
It is fascinating to me because I come from a very corporate background, so I'm well aware of things like you have to hit your revenue targets by the end of the fiscal year, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the moment you stepped down from DC in 2009, I really felt that you could have, at any point in time, pulled out a Watchmen sequel, a Watchmen spinoff, like Dan and Jim did a couple of years after you stepped down, and you didn't.
I believed through my whole career that you wanted to set good precedents to encourage good creativity. And there were a handful of things that were done creatively that I thought were done so well that they shouldn't be fucked with. And I certainly wouldn't have had any problems if Alan and Dave had wanted to do a Watchmen sequel, or if they had said, our best friends want to do this and we bless it. That's great. In much the same way, I felt the same way about Archie and Walt's Manhunter.
Right.
Certainly felt the same way about Neil's Sandman.
Yeah.
these were things that deserved respect. And if you showed respect for those things, it increased the possibility that people would aspire to do something of that level of quality. Contracts only go so far.
Right.
Nobody's ever written a contract that covers every possibility in the world. There are better and worse ones for being comprehensive, but certainly in a business like comics where there's not
So much
millions,
disruption.
well, there's just not millions and millions of dollars involved constantly to be able to afford, high-powered lawyers on every side arguing every point and every hypothetical that you might have. The contracts are never going to protect everybody completely. They're certainly not going to protect the talent completely because there's an inherent imbalance between the power available to the corporations and the power available to the individuals.
Right.
In a non-unionized, non-gilded industry. Even in a unionized and gilded industry, it's still not even, but at least it's a little more even.
But it's impossible. It is impossible to cover everything, right? So basically, like, let's just take that out of print clause. And then all of a sudden, like the year, I don't know, 2000 comes up and then digital comics becomes a thing. You could not possibly have predicted that.
Maybe could have. Maybe somebody smarter than I could have. But to predict the world of digital comics as it exists now, the webtoons model on the one hand,
yeah,
the buffet pricing that DC and Marvel use that is very common for the younger generation in music and so many other areas. I want all I can eat and I'll pay $10 a month. Well, the minute you do that, how do you account to people? And I think DC tries to do it honestly. I have no reason to believe otherwise from anything I've seen. But it's Byzantine, and it's rife with possibility for debate. Do you do it based on the number of minutes people were reading different comic books online? Do you read it just from, well, they opened the comic book in the course of it? Do you base it on the material was available for people? And the fact that it was available was one of the reasons people chose to go to the buffet. And even if they didn't take the snails, the snails were there. You were using my snails to lure them into your buffet. I get something for that, don't I? Mm-hmm. These are complex allocations to be dealing with, and even done honestly, there's room for debate about them.
Now, how did you deal with it? Because you were a creative person, but you were also the executive, and the intersection between art and commerce is a long, it's a debate as old as time. How did you decide when to veer one way and when to veer another way?
Try to be fair. It's really as simple as that. You tried to deliver a good creative product to the community that you were serving, whether that's the talent or the readers or the stakeholders in between, distributors and retailers. You understood that you were in a commercial business. You had obligations to your owners. You had obligations to your business partners. And you tried to marry all that all together. Did we do it perfectly? Of course not. But you tried to solve each problem based on the information that was available to you at that moment. And you tried to do it in a way that you felt was fair to the parties. And whether it was Jeanette, me, Joe Orlando, Dick Giordano, any of the people who were involved in managing the company over the years, we tried to take that kind of approach.
Did you ever have an instance where for example, you specifically were writing a story and then business you said, wait, I can't do that?
Sure. I mean, the whole elimination of Superboy from the Legion. Uh,
Oh,
writer me thinks it sucked. Um, business me thinks, well, that's the way John Byrne's building it. We got to go along with that.
and have to deal with it.
Yep.
Yeah. The issue where that Superboy dies is one of the first comics I ever read. So I thought that touched me as a kid.
Sorry.
Great Bill Sienkiewicz cover on it too.
Yeah, I have a
Uh,
beautiful blow up of it hanging in the garage.
it's it's
Still
it's
one of the
it's
offices.
it's beautiful. Uh, so I also wanted to talk to you about like the other things that you had to do to kind of balance out the talent, the creatives, and the thoughts of the stakeholders. So the biggest thing I could think of is the death and return of Superman. Did you have to field anything, like play defense for the creatives there while all of that was happening?
No, I did did enjoy the pleasure. It was the only time I can remember telling the accounting department not to mail out the royalty checks till I had a chance to write a note on them to go along with them, congratulating and thanking the people, because obviously we made out like bandits,
And
and thankfully creative people did as well. I think several people ended up buying their house off the royalties from that run.
now, given how successful that was, um, and again, talking about creativity in business, how much did you guys try to chase that financial success right after? Like, could you
Well,
even predict that?
when we went into the budget meeting that year with our bosses, we were working for Warner Brothers, which is a movie company, right, and a TV company, and
Yeah.
therefore understands being hit driven. Uh, we went in and said, "Look, we we got manna from heaven, and we stood there and we did our best to catch as much as we could in our baskets. Do not expect that next year. There's no way in hell we can do that. But we're happy here. See, got all this money this year. It's enough to like cover the I don't know the cafeteria budget for making a movie for a year, maybe." DC didn't make the kind of money that the other divisions did.
Yeah.
Um,
So they knew. It,
they were
is
they
that
had
the
good.
same? Is that the same thing that happens, for example, when you created, when you greenlit Infinite Crisis, and therefore you had this big event, but then you don't have another event that big, like a couple of years later?
That's tiny. That's tiny stuff.
It's tiny in comparison.
It's the effect of any one comic book project economically, even Death of Superman, is very small to our parent companies over
Okay.
the years. Death of Superman was large enough that at least it was, oh, there's $1 or $2 sitting there. That's
Mm.
nice. Go, puppy. Um, no, our bosses never had any idea of things like Infinite Crisis or Crisis on Infinite Earths. It's way too small to matter.
Interesting. Uh, and I think that is a nice reality check for comic book fans. Now, so my next question for that is a lot of book fans do actually think like because of the movies we change things in the comics, and how often does that actually happen?
I suppose it did from time to time, mostly because the creative people wanted to.
It's not an
Um,
edict from above or anything.
I think the only edict from the above that I can remember changing anything in the comics was when we killed Robin. They're saying, "Got to get a new Robin in there."
Oh, that's the
Um,
only one.
it's the only one I can remember offhand.
I had an interview with Jill Thompson out, and I thought this was a fascinating thing because she was talking about the Little Endless Storybook, and she said that you had to debate as to whether or not to put the Vertigo label on
Okay,
it.
I'm sure. I'm sure Jill's memory of it is vastly better than mine.
Well, judging from what you might be able to remember, like what is the like what would the logic be there for omitting that from omitting the Vertigo label, considering that the Endless are a Vertigo brand?
I have very vague memories. I mean, I remember the book.
Yeah.
And, I have no memory of the debate about the logo. I suppose it could have been if we think kids should read this, Vertigo is supposed to not be for little kids.
Okay. All right,
But
I
that's
get that. Is there anything that you rejected that you wish you didn't?
sure.
Would you care to name any?
I'm
No.
entitled to stupidities.
Okay. Is anything did you approve anything that you wish you didn't? Looking back.
I mean, some of the things that ended up either losing money or just dragging on forever and being frustrating. But again, that's what you do. You know, you put a ton of things out. Most of them will fail or be insignificant, and hopefully a few of them will be meaningful.
When you were coming up in comics, I do feel like well, obviously when you were coming up in comics, the the money maker was the floppies. And therefore it was very, very important for people to hit their deadlines. Like, very important. Now the moneymaker is trade paperbacks, graphic novels, etc. And I feel like deadlines are becoming less stringent because paperbacks are going to come out eventually.
I don't know. I don't know that that's representative of what the reality should be, or whether that's representative of what the practice currently is.
Right. I think it's what the practice currently is. I don't think it should be. But given that, if given a choice between a fast artist,
You're missing something in it, Duo.
yeah,
When I was coming up, it didn't matter who was doing the book.
oh,
I handled the deadlines at DC for about 5 years when I was a kid.
okay,
And I would walk into Len Wein's office, as Len was an editor, and we'd have a half-hour long discussion that would reduce itself to get somebody on that book and get it done, or I'm having Vinny ink it. Get somebody on that book penciling it now, or I'm having Dick Ayers pencil it. And both of us knew those were not the right solutions, but they were not such horribly wrong solutions that you could just say, you're insane, go away.
Mhm.
It became, well, can I get the slightly better answer? Can I get the much better answer? Up until the end of the newsstand era, the assumption at both DC and Marvel was that the characters were the primary thing selling the books. And you needed creative people who were competent, but no one was making a distinction whether Nestor Redondo was drawing it or Bernie Wrightson was drawing it,
Yeah.
as a decision about whether to buy Swamp Thing. Or Arthur Sidam, who was the other candidate besides Nestor to take over from Bernie. It was just, get someone who is reasonably good and who can fill the pages, and the character will either sell it or not sell it. So it's a different logic.
It's a different world.
When you move into the assuming that your reader is not 6 to 10, 6 to 12, but 16 to dead. They're adults or near adults, and they're making informed decisions. And I want Bernie Wrightson. I don't care. I don't really care about this Nestor Redondo guy. I want all of Bernie Wrightson's Swamp Thing, and if I have all of that, and you're not giving me any more of it, I'll find something else to read. The game changes.
So essentially what that's saying is we have to stick with the artist regardless of whether or not they're going to be late, if we believe that the artist is the one selling the book.
Or you have to find an artist who is comparable enough to it that the reader will say, "Oh, well, all right, you're not giving me Bernie Wrightson, but you're giving me Mike Kaluta." Okay,
Right.
That's just a different shade of wonderful. I'll take that.
Well, I feel like in that case, you have a person like Bernie Wrightson, Mike Kaluta, and then yeah, they're not the same. They're not interchangeable, but you can hit them in the same vein. What if that person was Alex Nino or Bill Sienkiewicz? Is there a way?
Bill is a pretty good chameleon when he sets his mind to it. I've never seen Alex do anything but Alex.
Right.
He may have, but I'm ignorant of it if so.
No, I
Uh,
have not. 3 hours away from me is the Comics Museum of the Philippines, the Comicero Museum,
that's
and
wonderful.
it's insane how my favorite Filipino artist is Alfredo Alcala, but I will say that if Alfredo Alcala took a break, I could probably find maybe 3 or 4 artists who could fill in an Alfredo Alcala book.
Mhm.
If Alex Nino took a break, I'm waiting for Alex Nino to come back.
Nobody. Yeah, nobody could do that.
Right.
And
So yeah.
we've moved to a world of much more personal style in the writing as well as the art, and that's a wonderful thing for comics in America. I can't speak for what's published locally in the Philippines. I'm not familiar with it. Um, it's more complicated to get it done. Um, good news is there's more reward for success than there was before.
Right.
Success is still the rare outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Most things don't generate enormous success financially or creatively. But that's true in all media forms.
Yeah. I feel all media is very, there's a lot of people who are entering it, but if you succeed, you really succeed.
It's a very, very small peak of the mountain. It's wonderful if you get there.
Mr. Paul Levitz, I've kept you here for an hour, and I'm sure you have a full day ahead. However, I will say you finally wrote a Marvel book last year. The Marvel was the Avengers was one of your big influences. How did it feel after 30 plus years at DC writing a Marvel book?
I mean, I always was a Marvel fan. There's a Marvel No Prize sitting on the shelf. Actually, you can see it a little bit.
Oh, I see it
over there from 1970, something like that.
Do you remember what continuity error you plugged?
I think it was just a letter in Amazing Adventures.
Okay.
The book that was split between the Inhumans and the Black Widow.
Okay.
I think I had two letters printed there. It was just great fun to play with characters I hadn't had a chance to play with. I think I spent every cent I made on the book on art from Alan. That's hanging on the wall. Getting to work with him was delightful. I didn't enjoyed his work for so many years back to DR and Quinch.
He hasn't lost a step either.
Yeah, no, he's wonderful. The challenge why I don't write more for them or write more for DC is just the characters have all changed.
Yeah.
So when I got the opportunity to do something for Marvel, I had to say, look, I don't know where the now is. Can I do something in the time I understand? And they were kind enough to say, yeah, fine, do a retro story. And we were able to agree, and enough people supported, I guess, that they made a few bucks. Not so many that they came saying, "Can you do another one tomorrow morning?" But they might listen if I hock them.
The characters change so much, and you were there for example, for Batman. Like you've seen him go from a human detective to whatever it is he is now. Unstoppable Bat God.
Maybe. I mean, I saw some of it, but a lot of it that I presided over on a business side wasn't the stuff that I was reading and caring about. I was reading it to assess it for a business purpose, perhaps, but the stuff I loved, we talked about imprinting a few moments ago. Sam Moskowitz, who was the historian of science fiction, uh, is credited with the statement that the golden age of science fiction is 12.
Yeah.
And that logic holds for, I think, all media forms. We imprint on things that we care about. The way I felt about Isaac Asimov is not the way I feel about a brilliant writer whose work I've come upon in the last batch of years. Lois McMaster's Bujold. Even, the way I feel about Asimov or Anne McCaffrey was because they hit me at a moment in my life. And the Batman that I love is Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams' Batman. The Superman that I love is Mort Weisinger's Superman. I'm not taking anything away from any of the other creative people who've worked on these things over the years. I don't have to care about the current version. I'll look at it every now and then and say, oh yeah, it looks like, Scott Snyder's writing interesting stories. Or I just read Frank and JR's Superman thing in a trade paperback edition that came in. Okay, it's pretty cool. They screwed around with it in a couple of ways that I agree with, a couple that I don't. But that's a good story. But I don't have to pay attention. I had to pay attention to a lot of stuff for a very long time. And now I don't. Now I can get to pay attention to my grandkids and whatever the hell I'm playing with that day, and have some fun.
That's so great. I told you that my first question to you was what made you fall in love with comics, and my last question to you is, all these years later, why do you still love comics?
It's a great medium. I love teaching comics. I love working with the kids writing their own comics. I teach writing the graphic novel. Graphic novel is literature. College kids, grad school kids. And it's a medium that's changing as we watch. And you got to keep your eyes open because it's happening all over the place. And if you don't watch carefully, Hulsey Hulls, who just won a Pulitzer for Feeding Ghosts. I didn't know Feeding Ghosts existed. Came out last year. I wasn't looking in that direction. Just won a fucking Pulitzer for memoir. Not even like a special one like they gave Art years ago.
Yeah,
This is competing with prose memoirs, and you pick it up, and this woman led an insane life. I think I'll go to Antarctica for a while. I think I'll bicycle across America for the next 6 months and go to different places. I think I'm going to go to learn Chinese so that I can speak to my relatives who I've had no contact with for my whole life and finally understand my grandmother's story. And she chronicled all of this in a magnificent 400-page graphic novel that took her years to do. And the world noticed. Wow. How can you not love a medium that's that cool?
low barrier to entry too.
Yeah, low barrier to entry if you're willing to starve.
Well,
But lots of people, thank God, are.
yeah. Thank you so much. This was a great conversation. I really appreciate your insights. I would like to thank you because I finally got my copy of the DC Comics Style Guide. And I know how instrumental you were in putting that together. I do think Jose Luis Garcia Lopez is maybe the greatest illustrator of superheroes who's ever lived.
Interesting. It'd be an interesting argument between. I mean, Kirby is more important to the evolution, I think, than Jose. But Jose's certainly up there. There's outside of Kirby, Neil, maybe Steranko. I have a hard time putting somebody else who's arguably ahead.
It's like my brain just sees him as the platonic ideal of of superheroes. George was always my favorite, but even comparing the two of them, like just from a draftsmanship level, I'm just like, I think Jose is better.
There's no comparison on a draftsman level.
Yeah.
I mean, Jose's technical art, his understanding of the human form, just is in another league. I mean, George was an amazing talent, one of the great talents of the business.
Yeah.
But Jose's pretty amazing, lovely man.
Is it true that you guys hid his phone number from Marvel?
I don't know how we would hide his phone number from Marvel.
It's just a rumor I read because like I think somebody was like, "Oh, he was our secret weapon," so we made sure that nobody knew how to contact him but us. Like
No.
that sounds impossible because of all of the cross pollination between the two companies.
Well, it's less impossible in those years than it is now.
Yes.
You know, you can go online in 2 minutes and find somebody's home phone number. But now we just kind of tried to treat him right and keep him busy.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
This was a fun one. Thank you for your thoughts and your efforts. And take care of yourself.
Thank you.